All right. Welcome in, everybody. We'll give it a couple minutes for others to join us and get all settled. But thank you to everyone for being here today. Welcome in. I am so glad that you're joining us today. We're going to dive deep into one of the most, I'd say, frustrating pain points that job seekers are facing in today's market, which is getting ghosted after interviews. So thank you to everyone for being here today. I did want to share some housekeeping information before we get started. So, if you are someone who is, following along today, we do have both slides and a workbook available that you can download. Feel free to print those off or take notes as we go throughout today's session. This way you can hold yourself accountable and, figure out certain, challenges maybe that you're running into right now that you didn't realize previously, and some solutions as to how you can flip that around. Because if you've been told, you're a great fit, but you just never hear back from employers or recruiters, or if maybe an interview feels like a black hole, you're not alone. You're in a situation that a lot of job seekers have faced at one point or another. And we are going to break down the current trends that really impact interview outcomes. We're going to clearly walk you through this along with some statistics and show you where most people unintentionally go wrong. And we're also going to give you that structure, tone, and language that are going to work in 2025. And yes, we're even going to show you how to close out with confidence and follow up in a way that gets you noticed today. So that is why we ultimately created this training. We've gotten a lot of feedback around the topic of interviews and how that ties in with branding. And also, we are going to use what we call our GLOW method to help guide you through this for every step of the way. And we're going to share some tangible examples as we go. So let's get into it. All right. So welcome in, everybody. My name is Christina, and I'm the Director of Training and Coaching here at Work It Daily. And I'm so excited to welcome you all to the session. I've actually been in career coaching and training for over 5 years now, and I've had the privilege of working with thousands of job seekers and career professionals. So helping them refine their message, strengthen their interview presence, and also ultimately following the steps of the strategy that will help them land the jobs that they want. So developing trainings, resources, and also working directly one-on-one with clients as well. And I'm really passionate about helping others reach their goals. So my approach is very practical, it's actionable, and rooted in real-world coaching. So with that being said, I'm really excited to walk you through today's topic and the strategy that contributes to effective networking and interviewing, and share some of the tools that we give our members to help them stand out and land offers. And by the end of the session, what you're going to have is a really clear, personalized strategy that aligns with your brand and also helps you confidently apply those modern interview techniques that are going to work for you in 2025. This way you can stand out as that must-have candidate and just move forward with that sense of clarity and overall confidence. All right, so let's jump in. Now, before we get into the specifics, I did just want to make a quick note that there is a special offer, actually a couple of special offers that we have just for attendees today. So if you're going to stick with us, wait until the end. I'll give you all the details, and there's more information to come with that special gift. All right. Awesome. So let's cover today's agenda. I want to give you a quick overview of where we're headed right now. So what we're going to do first is unpack why ghosting is so common right now and what you can do to avoid this. I'll show you what hiring managers are really evaluating you on when you speak, and we'll build your interview personal brand so that way you can deliver in more of a consistent and a confident way when it comes to your messaging and the brand that you want to give off. We're also going to show you a proven framework to help you structure your answers better when it comes to the different types of interviews, and how to close and follow up in a way that helps you stand out just from the crowd and sets yourself apart. And this isn't a passive training. This is really your playbook to reset your career and doing so with purpose. All right. So any questions that you have, feel free to pop them in the chat. Just put the word question before it, and we'll take some of those at the end if we have some time. All right. Awesome. So at Work It Daily, we help people solve career problems using a coaching framework that we call the GLOW method. And if you've worked with us before, you've probably seen this. So if you're new, This is how we break down real career growth into something that you can take action on and start doing so today. So to break this down further, we have the G in the GLOW method, which is for gain perspective. This is all about understanding what's really going on, both in your career and inside the job market, which right now is highly, highly competitive. Right now there are still lots of layoffs going on. There are still a lot of people who are unemployed. And, sometimes we just feel stuck because we're not looking at things when it comes to the full picture. We're not gaining that sense of perspective. Okay. So after that, we're going to get into Illuminate the Goal. That's what the L stands for in the GLOW method. We're going to help you define a direction, not just, any goal, but one that is really aligned with, your skill sets when it comes to interviewing and your brand. And that's how you will keep this very focused and clear to employers. And then O is for own your actions. So once you have that sense of clarity, you have illuminated the goal, it's time to take control of things. So we're going to help you create a plan that is realistic, but also fits your lifestyle. Because when it comes down to consistency, that beats intensity. And that is highly important when it comes to your career growth. Okay. And then lastly, and arguably most importantly of the GLOW method is work it daily. That's what the W stands for. So this is the piece that most people skip. And you have to build habits around your learning. You have to track your progress and, make sure that you are doing this for yourself. So that way you're staying visible to the right people. And that's exactly how today's session is going to be structured. All right. So with the interview topic, this fits right in. You're going to see how we start by gaining perspective on what's changed in the hiring process. Like I said, illuminating the goal and, branding, taking ownership of your delivery, and finally building consistent habits so your job search momentum really sticks. So let's dive into the first stage here. All right, so gain perspective. Let's talk about why we want to focus on this topic today. Now, if you don't understand what's really happening in today's, like I said, competitive job market and how this impacts the interview process, you're just going to keep repeating the same mistakes and just wondering why nothing's working. And that's not a good feeling to have. You don't want to make assumptions. You actually want to get down to the challenges and figure out how you can find solutions to improve things here. And we're going to walk through the major trends that, you need to be informed on and how they're showing up in interviews so you can stop getting blindsided or even worse, ghosted. Okay. And just a quick note, I did want to mention that this session will be recorded and the recording will be available. All right. Awesome. So here's the first shift. Interviews matter more than ever before. We say this, we've been saying this a lot recently. When it comes to your materials, yes, you absolutely should still, have a resume on hand, a cover letter on hand, and an optimized LinkedIn profile. But, when it comes to the bigger topic, the resume will eventually be dead. You want to focus on how you can brand yourself online and to the right people, and also on the world's #1 networking platform, which is LinkedIn. Recruiters and hiring managers often say that once you've made it, past the resume, the interview is what seals the deal. But most job seekers, especially after a break or some time in the role, they aren't sure how to show up with that sense of structure. And that leads to, vague, rambling answers, or even worse, just over explaining. So in terms of this slide here, you can see that 68% of recruiters say that interview performance is the #1 factor after the resume review. But also 1 in 3 job seekers say that they tend to just wing it. They go into the interview, they wing it, they don't have a strategy in place. Okay. And then also the other thing I wanted to talk about is that we've seen members lose out on offers, not because of their gap, but because they didn't clearly show how they add value now. Okay. That unclear delivery can be a real deal breaker. And that all ties back to personal branding and finding your pro voice. Okay. So this is where the shift really happens. And, it's not about defending your past. It's about positioning your future when it comes to your personal brand. All right. Now, I want to get really honest with you all, because most people think that they're being ghosted because of their break, but that is rarely the case. Ghosting usually happens when the interviewer or interviewers can't see the connection between your story and their open role. Okay. If you spend the interview just explaining why you left or, apologizing for the time off, you're focusing way too much on the past and not the future. So you need to essentially shift that conversation forward. That's what we teach in our coaching, how to pivot the dialogue from, what happened on one side of things to actually, here's what I bring and why it matters now. And this is, these are the types of challenges that I solve and why these are so important to, your organization's growth. So you want to make sure, again, you're not repeating your resume, you're not over explaining your breaks, and that also, if you don't connect the dots between your story and theirs, that they're not going to put that together for you. That's not something that they do. You need to actually walk them through it. So like I said, interviews are not about the past. It's more future focused. And that's what you want to get into when speaking about your value and, how, what your skills can translate into the role and how you solve those types of challenges. All right. So the next thing I wanted to get into is, the fear is the thing that really makes you ramble when it comes to interviews that you go on. And one of the biggest challenges that we see with job seekers who are returning to the workforce, maybe just after a career break, a layoff, or maybe even just a pivot, things like that, it's the tendency to over-explain their story in interviews. And it usually comes from a good place. I did just want to preface with that. You want to show that you're still essentially capable. So you feel the need to fill in every gap and justify every single transition. But the problem is when you are someone who tends to ramble, you end up just diluting your message and sounding a lot less confident. Even when your story is really strong and you mean well, and, you might have great experience, you might, totally qualify for the role and be a really good fit. But if you ramble, it can hurt your chances here. And that's why we talk so much about personal branding here at Work It Daily and, finding your pro voice. That is something that is what we want to put top of mind when it comes to this topic. Confidence doesn't come from having the perfect resume or the perfect response. Instead, it comes from having a game plan that you trust. And, that is where we have certain formulas that come in that we'll get into today. So instead of just winging it or oversharing and feeling like you need to touch on every single skill and every single aspect in all of your answers, you instead need to focus on anchoring your answers in a really clear, story-focused way that is pretty concise and shows your sense of growth and ownership and accountability, of course. You're not just describing what happened, you're actually showing how you evolved and how that evolution makes you a better candidate today. It's a mindset shift from, more of that defensiveness to that sense of purpose. And it needs to be very sharp and tight. So when you practice this structure, you're not only sharpening your delivery here, you are building that sense of trust with yourself. And it's going to sound more natural, the more that you practice this as well. All right. And that is what turns those nerves, those interview nerves and, anxiety pre-interview into confidence. Because, the more that you rehearse and it starts to come natural to you, that's what makes you sound really calm. It makes you sound really clear and just overall credible in the interview room. Okay, does that make sense? Now, so we covered the first aspect of the GLOW method, which is gain perspective. I now want to get into the next piece, which is illuminating the goal. Okay, so before you start, preparing for the next steps, you need a clear destination and you need to write out some of these goals. Even jot it down on paper, follow along as we go throughout and take notes. Because you want to think about, well, what does success actually look like when it comes to your next chapter? It's easy to say something like, I want to grow, but, growth has to be defined as something that is meaningful. So we often say that your interview brand is your pro voice. It's how you actually present your professional identity in a clear way, in a confident way as well. And making sure that you have this consistent tone across every conversation that you're having, okay? Think of it as your, intentional messaging strategy here. Your pro voice isn't just about sounding polished. It's about making it easy for the interview to actually understand who you are, how you tend to work, and what kind of value your UVA you constantly bring to the table, all right? And when you nail those things, you take the guesswork out of hiring. your pro voice is built on a couple different pillars, okay? Focusing on your top strengths, your work style and your unique value to the team. And we have quizzes on this within Work It Daily as well. But these are really, core branding elements that allow you to, define different strengths and understand how you should be communicating your value. And a really good way to do this is also with our job matching matrix, which we'll talk a little bit more about today as well. Because if you don't know your differentiators, the hiring team certainly won't know those either. So you need to make it clear and define this for yourself before you speak on that to other decision makers in the interview process. So just to give you an example, maybe you're someone who thrives in like a high growth environment, you bring calm to the chaos, or, maybe you're a process driven optimizer who is really passionate about transforming different complex problems into clear, scalable solutions. But the key here is to focus on your consistency. When every answer in your interview is reinforcing those three elements, strengths, style, and value, you build a narrative that sticks. You're no longer just a candidate. You become the right fit, that must-have candidate that I was talking about earlier, as opposed to that nice-to-have candidate. And this isn't just a theory. According to Career Builder, a survey that they conducted, 87% of employers say that a strong personal brand influences who they hire. And that's a really high percentage. That means if you're not crafting and communicating your brand, you're leaving opportunity just right there on the table. All right. So instead of memorizing the perfect answers, focus on actually building alignment and understanding your brand for yourself, and know, what you want them to remember about you. You're the one who has control of your personal brand and your pro voice. And you have, the ability to describe this in a way that reflects the impression that you want to give off and the intrinsic motivation that you have. So after that, let your pro voice, guide the way that you talk about your experience, how you solve problems for employers, what you're that go-to person for, and also how you'll contribute to their team and add value. How can you be an asset here? Okay. That's how you leave a lasting impression, and that's how you get hired. So definitely something that you want to think about. Now, when you've defined a strong personal brand, what we call your pro voice, your goal is to thread it in throughout the entire interview process. That means that every single one of your responses, no matter what the question is, that becomes a moment for you to reinforce your strengths, your work style and the value that you bring to the table. And that is something that we coach heavily on here at Work It Daily. It's not about reciting a tagline or sounding rehearsed and making sure that you are just thinking back to memory. And when you practice that response last night, you want to actually understand the work that you do and how you make an impact. Okay. It's about weaving your themes naturally into storytelling, and that's what sticks. All right. For example, if let's say your pro voice is something like, I bring clarity to chaos, every behavioral response should showcase times where you simplified different processes, eliminated confusion, or even calmed down a tense project or a team. Maybe you even streamlined like a broken system. Maybe you've built a process from scratch, or you translated, complexity for a stakeholder group. These stories reinforce your brand without ever having to state it, word for word. You'll actually know what to speak on and how to tie that into the conversation. Does that make sense? It's important to remember that hiring managers and recruiters, they're trying to connect the dots across your experience. Your job is to make those connections really easy. So when your answers are echoing the same themes, like, I simplify systems, or I bridge gaps between communication or communication gaps between, people and the different processes, you become memorable. And if you support those with numbers as well, you're providing the evidence, you're showing the depth of your experience here. And not just being memorable, you're showing that you're more so that trustworthy person, and you're backing things up with the facts. And, that essentially builds that sense of credibility and authority, which is something that you need to have when it comes to your pro voice. So when your messaging aligns across just multiple stories and examples, the interview, those different interviewers that you're speaking with, they will believe, okay, well, this person knows exactly who they are and how they add value. And that's what we want. We want someone who's confident in their abilities. All right. If picture yourself, let's say you're the recruiter, you're interviewing some candidates and they're questioning their abilities, their examples don't relate, they're all over the place. That doesn't show that they're confident in the work. And you might start to be questioning things about that candidate. All right. So try to put yourself in the recruiter's shoes and you'll see how this all pieces together. Because if you have, the stories that tie in, the examples that reinforce your skills and your value, that's when you'll gain that sense of trust from the interviewers. All right. And there's lots of decision makers in the process there. And that's something that we'll be covering in the micro training series, which we'll get into in just a little bit. But instead of treating each question like more of an isolated answer, think about how it supports your overall brand strategy. And that's what helps you stand out, not just because you're qualified, but because you are someone who's aligned and you're being intentional in how you communicate your value. So something that's really important to remember. Now, we have a formula that we developed over at Work It Daily. This is something that our CEO and founder, JT, actually developed years back. And it is one of the most powerful interview tools that we teach our members over at Work It Daily. It really transforms even the most uncomfortable parts of your career. For example, layoffs, gaps that you have, pivots that you're making, a career change that you're making for yourself. It really allows you to transform that into a story of growth. So that way hiring managers can understand it shows your sense of accountability, and it's a way for you to show learning experiences and how it allowed you to grow moving forward. Like we said, a theme today is thinking about things in the future, not just in the past. So instead of just describing what happened, you're actually elevating the story by reflecting on what you learned, how it shaped your approach moving forward. All right. And that's what makes your response sound a lot more confident, also very, emotionally intelligent and aligned with today's workplace expectations. Okay. For example, instead of saying like, I was laid off due to a restructuring, you can say something like, during the restructure, I realized how much I really enjoy the strategic side of my role. I use that time to take a product management course, and now I actually lead cross-functional meetings more efficiently, even tying in numbers to support that further. So as you can see the difference, you've shown resilience, clarity, and motivation all in one answer. All right. And this structure helps calm your nerves instead of trying to just wing it or memorize different answers word for word. Especially, since you're working from a reliable framework that helps you stay on track. That's why our members use this formula in interviews and see results really quickly. Their answers feel less rehearsed. It doesn't sound like a speech, and it feels a lot more genuine and focused when it comes to storytelling. And the other thing I wanted to mention is, if you're being asked a question that requires an open-ended response, like most behavioral questions, you can, resort to this framework. As long as you have a couple of examples that you can work off of that you prepared. If you have a question that maybe you weren't expecting, you at least have the framework in place that you can work off of. All right. So that is something that is going to be really important to think about when it comes to receiving questions in the interview and not knowing how to answer. At least you can work off of some examples you prepared, tying that in with the experience plus learn equals grow framework. What happened? What did you take away? And how did that allow you to evolve and, apply it going forward and grow as a professional, essentially? So this positions you as a really self-aware professional and someone who also grows from every experience and shows that sense of accountability. And that's the kind of person that hiring managers want to hire. All right. Okay. So I wanted to walk through a quick example just to show you a visual on how to use this approach. This example is using the experience plus learn equals grow framework that we teach here at Work It Daily. The question for this example is, why did you take time off? And instead of over explaining or apologizing, you can see that we really leaned into the structure here. Okay. So we began by stating, I stepped away to care for a loved one. That part shows the experience. It's honest, it's clear, it sets the context without getting too personal. Then we moved into, what was learned. During that time, I completed a certification and stayed active with freelance work. This also reframes the gap as, a time of intentional development, which essentially really just instantly combats any assumptions of, being stagnant. And then finally, getting into the growth part of this formula, we shared, how growth was applied. Now I'm reentering with renewed clarity and a stronger focus on collaborative project work. So this part is really crucial. It ties directly into what we're now bringing to the role. And this is exactly what we mean by using your pro voice. It's not just about answering the question. It's using that answer to reinforce your personal brand and also your forward momentum. So the real win here is how this approach turns, what could be seen as a weakness into a signal of resilience, also having motivation and readiness. It shows that it shows different recruiters and hiring managers that you're actually owning your story and you're intentional about your next chapter here. And that's what interview branding is all about, showing up with confidence and clarity, even when discussing the hard stuff. So let's talk about what not to do, because these are, small but critical mistakes that can derail interviews. One of the most common red flags that we hear inside the platform at Work It Daily while working with clients is when candidates say that they are just open to anything. While this might seem like you are someone who's flexible and willing to work with them, it actually signals a lack of clarity and direction. Okay. You don't want to brand yourself as a Jack or Jill of all trades. Employers want to know that you're genuinely excited about this role and also their company, not that you're just looking for any job. Okay. Another big mistake is also apologizing for things like your gap. And that immediately can lower your confidence and invite that sense of doubt. So instead, own it, frame it using the experience plus learn equals growth strategy that we teach. And repeating your resume also just verbatim, that's another trap. Remember, they've already read it. You don't want to recite everything that they've already gone through. Okay. Your job in the interview is to bring it to life with context and stories and value and also connection to their needs, along with sharing, okay, well, these are my skills. I also see that you are running into, these challenges, or, this is, an area that I solve for, and I'm really excited to let me tell you a little bit more about, how I do this and how I've done it in past roles. So that way you're showing how you can add value and solve for the same challenges. Okay. Also, another thing is using buzzwords without real examples. All right. Saying you're a team player or you're detail oriented without backing it up. That can make you sound generic and forgettable. And we always say this, even when it comes to like LinkedIn and your resume, when you're customizing that to the job description, you don't want to use like character traits or soft skills. You need to get into the specifics of your brand and your pro voice, essentially. You need to speak on those hard skills, those technical skills. And if you're wondering if something is a hard skill, ask yourself, well, can I quantify that? Okay. And we always say clarity and alignment win the offer. Hiring managers are asking themselves one thing, does this person solve this problem for us? How can they add value? And that's why your pro voice, built around your strengths, your work style, and your UVA, is your secret weapon. All right. So every answer should really reinforce that voice. You should show them exactly who you are and how you'll help them succeed. How can you help, generate revenue for the team? When you approach interviews in this way and show that you can solve these problems, you stop reacting and you actually start leading the conversation with intention. All right. So next, let's get into how to tell stories that show your value. Hiring managers aren't just listening for words, they're actually listening for evidence. Like we say a lot here at Work It Daily, it's all about evidence-based hiring. So you need to provide the facts, you need to provide the numbers and quantify when you can. So when you say something like, oh, I'm very detail-oriented, without showing how, it becomes white noise. Every candidate uses those buzzwords. But when you say something like, I caught a $20,000 error before it hit a client's account, that's when they're sitting up and they're listening and they're engaged. It shows that you have the proof, and that's what makes your pro voice credible. Okay. This is why we coach our members to create a library of short, outcome-focused stories that really align with their personal brand, okay? And bonus points, like I said, if you can quantify that information. So these stories should really highlight your strengths, like I said, work style and value that you're consistently bringing to the table. And if you're someone who is employed now, try to keep your own track record of this. Put together your own document or your own journal of wins, even if they're smaller wins, just so you can remember numbers that you can later refer to in the interviews. Because you don't want to look, back in a couple years and think, well, oh, I should have jotted down that project I was working on, or, numbers would have been key if I knew in, this particular area, this project I worked on. That would have been a great example that I could share in this interview answer as I'm preparing. That's why you want to make sure that you are tying in, number, results, specific impact, and keeping your own list of that. All right. And when you weave these into stories, and share that in your responses, you're essentially reinforcing your brand without having to state it directly. So instead of telling that interviewer who you are, you need to show them this. You need to do so through action. You need to do so through results. And in interviews, results speak louder than traits. All right. I always say this, but people absorb numbers best. So if you can tie numbers when possible and show the depth of your experience, that is what's going to be key and allow you to stand out. Okay. And this, while others are saying things like, I'm a great communicator, you'll be the one sharing how you're a proactive communicator that, for example, saved a project deadline or maybe resolved a cross-team conflict. And that's when you make yourself memorable, especially when it comes down to things like the final rounds of interviews where, a hiring manager has 2 green apples and they just need to pick one. Okay. So that is what you want to focus on going forward. All right. Now, the next thing I want to get into is the job matching matrix. This is a big tip that I'm going to be sharing here today. And this is something that we actually have available within our Work It Daily community if you become a member with us. All right. And we often call this your interview cheat sheet for a reason. So before you ever walk into an interview, you need to be crystal clear on what employer they actually want and what they're looking for. Not just what the job posting is saying, but you need to dive deep on their pain points and really dissect that job description. You need to show the must-haves that the hiring managers is looking to solve and how you match up to that, how you align. All right. So the matrix helps you, distill the job posting and break down some of those core skill areas and, responsibilities that you absolutely need to have to get hired in the role. You need to show that you understand, what happens if that skill is, not done correctly or if it isn't present at all. And then also you need to show, for example, how you match up to that, how you've solved for those problems, how you understand, the fact that, okay, well, I see if this skill is missing, this, and this can happen. And this is how I've solved for this. This is how I've added value. And let me break that down for you further. Bonus points, like I said, if you can quantify. But this might be, like project management, maybe stakeholder communication or an analytical problem. Think about these things when it comes to the job description. And then for each of those needs, like I said, you need to align to your own examples. Ideally, a specific story or achievement that proves your value and shows that you are highly proficient in that skill, and sharing a specific example of a time that supports that. All right. And this does 2 things here. It first off keeps your answers really sharp and focused. And it also works to ensure that you're speaking directly what the company is trying to solve or what the department is trying to solve in that time. Okay. You're not just answering questions. You're actually demonstrating why you're the solution to their problems. And that is how you differentiate your answers from other candidates who are just winging it or giving generic answers and saying, yes, I'm qualified because I do have those skills. You need to take it a couple steps further there. And when you combine the job matching matrix, with your Provoice, which expresses your personal brand, and especially that experience plus learn equals grow formula, you're not just prepared, you're actually showing yourself as a strategic candidate that is really focused on the strategy. And every response becomes very intentional. You're aligning your responses and they're just rooted in value overall. And that shows the interviewer that you didn't just apply to this role, you understood the role. And that's the kind of clarity that builds trust, which is ultimately what gets you hired. Okay. All right. So far we've talked about gaining perspective and illuminating your goal. Now it's time to follow the next step, which is owning your actions. And this is where a lot of people do get stuck, not because they're not capable, but because they don't have clear, realistic plans that fit their life. So today we're going to start mapping that out. Okay. So this way you can really dial in on your goals and start taking, specific measures to work towards that. All right. So let's break this down together. The first thing I want to get into is owning your delivery and practicing like a pro. All right. Practice isn't just about memorizing your answers. It's about developing muscle memory for how you communicate under pressure. All right. So one of the most common mistakes that we see job seekers make is reading responses, silently in their heads or just jotting down bullets without ever saying them out loud. But interviews are verbal. So how you sound actually matters just as much as what you're saying and what you are, conveying in the interview. And at Work It Daily, we teach members to record themselves on video, play this back, because this helps catch things like, for example, monotone delivery, filler words like ums and uhs, even like posture if you're someone who is slouched or, moving around, doing that nervous fidgeting, twisting in your office chair, or even, lack of eye contact. We've seen this happen before. We do have, mock interviews that we conduct, and we have members who will just look to the side or they'll look up, or sometimes we notice them even looking down at their notes. So that's why you need to practice beforehand, and doing so in a way that's private, just with yourself, recording yourself from the computer. You'll notice these things about yourself, and you can hold yourself accountable at that point. So you might think you're coming off as confident and clear, but then you play it back and you're going to see this for yourself. And then of course, you can course correct. But for example, we had a member that, recently we did a mock interview with them. We realized that they were just rushing through every answer and barely breathing. They were talking so fast. I could tell they had a couple notes up, but they were just trying to speak as quick as possible to fit in like lots of examples. And it was just too much. So giving them the recording, having them watch that back, it gave them awareness to just slow things down, sound a little more composed, and collect your thoughts, and try not to squeeze in every single point into these responses that you're sharing. We also had different situations where we've had mock interviews and members realized that they were using phrases like, kind of, or stopping and going and in almost every sentence, which is, a huge confidence killer. So that kind of insight only comes from real practice. You need to identify these things to know that they're even occurring, period. You might not have known that you were someone who would say it that much. Okay. I'm guilty of doing that as well. In my example, personally, I'm someone who would always say the word like, and even us and ums. And I would play back my trainings. I'd listen to myself and I would say, oh, geez, I'm doing this a lot. This is something that I need to work on. And I'm going to make it a goal to, eliminate those us and ums and try to use different words in place for things like. Okay. And it's something that, occasionally will slip up on from time to time. But if you can identify it, you'll know it's something to work on and you can start to practice that. Okay. And that's why we recommend setting up, mock interviews even by yourself at first. If you need extra support, we have the mock interviews available at Work It Daily for purchase. But even with like a friend or a trusted family member, if you want to go with someone that you know already, maybe you're more comfortable or confident that way. But again, you can always do that yourself by recording video, and just pairing that with your Provoice and, the jobs matching matrix and the formulas that we gave you today, the experience plus learn equals grow formula, that will help you stay sharp and on brand in every response. Okay. I hope that makes sense. All right. So the other thing I wanted to get into is the Provoice in your close. So your closing statement is one of the most underrated parts of the interview, but it's actually your last and most impactful moment to leave a lasting impression with the interviewer. So Work It Daily, we actually coach members to treat their close like a brand message. This isn't the time to say, well, thanks for your time and leave it at that. You want to actually reinstate your Provoice. The unique blend of your strengths, your work style, your value that you've consistently demonstrated throughout the conversation. Okay. A strong closing should do a couple of these things. Remind them of your key strength, link directly to their role or their challenges, and express genuine enthusiasm. That is where alignment really shines. Okay. A lot of times people assume that, the interviewer will know that they're excited, but unfortunately, sometimes they don't know unless you say it and, explain that, oh, wow, that sounds really, that aligns really well with, my career goals going forward, things like that. So if the interviewer, walks away thinking, well, they get what we need and they're excited to deliver it, you've done your job. And that's why you need to communicate all three of these things. Okay. So for example, instead of a generic close, like, thanks for your time, you can say, just wanted to quickly add to the conversation that I am really excited about this opportunity. I feel like it really plays to my strengths in simplifying complex workflows. Talk about a specific element, like a specific topic that really resonated, especially as it ties in with your brand. And then you could say something like that, like, I'm confident I can help your team increase productivity while, reducing project delays. And, I appreciate you having me here today. That kind of close reinforces your brand, and it shows that you've been paying attention to not only their needs, but what challenges they need you to solve in this role. You're not just promoting yourself. Okay. So members who do this well just often hear, post-interview feedback like, well, you seem like a really good culture fit, or, you really understood what we were looking for. And that is the power of your Provoice. It sticks. So bottom line is to end with clarity, show energy, show excitement, show your intention here. And if you do those things, you're going to be the candidate that they remember when they're making that final decision. And it comes down to just a couple people. That way they see you as the must-have candidate as opposed to the nice-to-have candidate. All right. Awesome. So now let's get into a follow-up strategy that works. So a well-crafted follow-up email isn't just for good manners, believe it or not. It's actually a strategic part of your personal brand. So at Work It Daily, we teach, what you do and after an interview can make just as strong as an impression as what you said during it. So that's why we coach our members to send a follow-up message within 24 hours, ideally within the same day if you can, or let's say if your interview was, a Tuesday afternoon, first thing Wednesday morning. Okay. When your conversation is still fresh in their mind, that's when you want to get that in their inbox, because this reinforces that you're being proactive and that you are someone who's genuinely interested and excited about the role. But it's not just enough to say, thanks for your time, like hope to hear from you soon. You want to reinforce something specific that was discussed, similar to how you wrapped up the interview, but just quickly touch on it in this email. Okay. Maybe the hiring manager mentioned an upcoming project or shared a challenge that the team is facing. Mentioning this shows that you are actively listening and are already thinking about how you can contribute. And then bring it back to your Provoice, the strength, the value, or the work that you actually emphasized in the interview, and connect it directly to what they need. All right. For example, if you're someone that really thrives in a high growth, maybe fast-paced work environment, your follow-up can include something like, after learning more about the team's expansion plans, I'm even more excited about the opportunity to bring structure and momentum to your onboarding process. But these kinds of details, even though they're small details, they show alignment. They show that you paid attention and that you are someone who has a genuine interest in not only the role, but the company as well. And hiring managers remember those candidates who sound highly aligned. So the truth is, many job seekers skip the follow-up, or they'll just forget to do it because, they got into something after, they didn't have a follow-up reminder set, and, they don't send it, or they'll send something very generic. But when you actually take the time, the extra 3 to 5 minutes to write a customized, thoughtful, branded follow-up email or note, you're going to set yourself apart from the competition and the others who haven't done this. Okay. It essentially closes the loop and reaffirms that you're not just the strong candidate. You are the right candidate that they should choose. And at the end of the day, that's what turns interviews into offers. All right. Now we've reached the final step of the GLOW method, which is most importantly working it daily. So this is the part where the real growth happens, not just from a one-time push, but from consistent effort and energy and using these useful habits over time. It comes from showing up week after week, holding yourself accountable, and being really committed to your plan. All right. You don't, need to be perfect here. You should not be spending hours on a day's end just contributing to this strategy. A little bit of time each day is how you stay consistent and proactive. So one of the most important things that we coach at Work It Daily is the fact that interviewing is a skill. It's not a final exam. So many job seekers fall into the trap of thinking, okay, this interview needs to go perfectly or I have failed. That's not the case. That mindset creates just a whole wave of pressure, and it leads to you overthinking or underperforming and letting some of that NST, that negative self-talk, get into your head. What top performers do differently is they treat every interview as a growth opportunity, whether it leads to an offer or not. Okay. We like to say, not today doesn't mean not ever. Just because one opportunity you got rejected from or you got ghosted, you never heard back. That doesn't mean you're never going to get hired at that company ever. Okay. It's just a one-time thing. They just said no that one time. All right. So keep learning, keep improving. I like to compare this to like working out. You don't just get to where you are. You can always be better. You can continue to make your muscles stronger and, continue to be healthier. So we encourage members to, for example, analyze interviews, just like you analyze data. All right. If you didn't get the role, you need to do a deep dive here. Ask yourself, okay, well, where did I lose the momentum? Was I connecting my stories clearly to what they needed? Did I reinforce my Provoice and my brand enough? Or was I simply just repeating my resume? And when you look at each conversation with more of that sense of curiosity rather than self-judgment, you're going to start tracking patterns. And those patterns give you control over your progress. So that's something that's really important that I want you to remember. And like I said, this is where the job matching matrix can even come back into play. Use it after the fact to reflect on, whether your examples matched the employer's needs as tightly as they could have. Okay. But keeping momentum isn't just about interviews. It's about staying top of mind in your industry. That's why we teach members to build a habit of, small, consistent brand building actions. That might be, commenting on posts on LinkedIn from, different leaders in your field, even sharing a takeaway from a recent article that you read, maybe writing a post as to a certain challenge that you worked through recently and how you solved for it and sharing the progress there. Even sending a quick, message to a professional contact to back channel. But these small acts really work to compound things. They help you stay visible, they help you stay relevant, and they also help you stay ready for the next thing. And this is the Work It Daily step in the GLOW method. It's about doing something, every day or, every other day to move your career forward. Ideally getting in a flow of doing this, maybe, every weekday and, taking the weekends off to regain your energy and, going through and, maybe on the weekend, saving that for your hobbies. But during the week, spending maybe at least, I'd say 20 minutes, 30 minutes doing this. All right. It's about doing something to move your career forward. Job searching doesn't stop between interviews. And just because you got rejected or, you were ghosted, the whole point of this training, just know that shouldn't allow you to, give up or, stop working towards your brand, because your personal brand, your network, and your strategy should constantly stay in motion. And if you keep the momentum up, you already know what to work on. You're continuously working towards that. And if you treat your search like a process instead of a guessing game, that's when you build confidence. That's when you have more clarity and momentum to keep going, and you're more, engaged. And that's what separates those who land quickly from those who actually stay stuck. Okay. So if you want to go one step further, I would keep more of like a simple interview lessons learned tracker. And this is where you jot down, what went well, what you feel really good about in interviews, what you do differently, maybe questions that you were stuck on, or how you'll improve next time. We've seen members use this to cut their job search time in half because they're learning, they're adjusting every single step of the way and jotting down things that they need to work on, going and, spending some time for the next couple of weeks working on that and landing an offer. So don't wait for the perfect opportunity. Bottom line here, and just to conclude things, you need to keep building your brand muscle now. And the more consistency that, you have in this process, you keep showing up for yourself, the easier it becomes to stand out when it matters most. All right. So something I wanted you to really take away at the end, and keeping a tracker of those things is really going to be key. I know it might sound a little silly, but it really does work. And especially if you can find little things to hold yourself accountable on. I know life gets busy, it's summer, things are a little bit busier in the summer with vacations and school starting up and kids and just having a life overall. But, make time for yourself, even if it's just 30 minutes at the end of your day, or maybe on lunch or at the beginning of the day when you're feeling more energized. Okay. Awesome. All right. So I will take questions in just a couple of minutes. So if anyone has questions, I'll take a couple. But I did want to share some exciting news and the special gift that I have for you all today. So we have a special offer just for those joining us live. Right now, you can unlock our full Work It Daily premium coaching experience for just $69 a month. And this is $10 off our regular $79 a month rate. This offer gives you everything that you need to stay supported, focused, and consistent with your career growth. So as you can see on the screen, we have a lot of information that comes with our premium membership. We give you access to 6 of our targeted career and job search courses that will help you identify your Provoice. We have an excellent course that covers pretty much every aspect that you can think of when it comes to interviews, if you're looking for a deep dive on this. We also have premium only live events. We have a micro training that I'll talk about in just a second that's starting up this week, only for premium members. Unfortunately, this is not available to our standard members. We also have unlimited one-on-one coaching that you can write in any hour of the day. We have personalized resume, LinkedIn, and cover letter reviews. Even if you're someone who's working through like interview answers or, job matching matrix, and you want to send that into coaching to get a second set of eyes, you're more than welcome to do so. And our coaches will be in touch within a couple days to give you some feedback on that. But we also have like templates, scripts, other job tools and resources, and also some exclusive features like our quizzes and other resources to help you advance further. All right. So to claim your discount at checkout, you'll just enter in the promo code AUGUSTCOACH. It's one word, no spaces. And again, this is a limited time offer that's only available to those attending today's session. All right. Okay. And then I also have a couple more things in store for today. This is actually something brand new that we are bringing back. We've had mock interviews in the past, and we are going to start implementing these again today, which is highly exciting. It's only available for a limited time, so we want to make sure our premium members are the first to know. We normally have interviews as a add-on for $129, but if you sign up for a premium membership, you can purchase this for only $59. Okay. This is only available to premium members, just to clarify. But right now, you can, if you sign up for a premium membership, you can get this for just $59. And normally the pricing on these, even with just other competitors, is way over, $500, just to give you kind of an estimate there. But what's included is a 30-minute mock interview with one of our expert Work It Daily career coaches. And this is customized to the types of roles that you're applying for. It's also designed to feel like a real interview with bonus, real-time coaching built in. And within 48 hours, we actually give you a full evaluation on every single question that is asked in the mock interview. We write that out and we analyze all parts of it, like the content delivery, the tone, the length of your responses, what could be better, things like that. And we give you frameworks on all of those questions and how those should be answered as well. And this is a really incredible way to refine your Provoice and also just test your storytelling overall. And we ask that, if you're someone who, signs up for a mock interview, that you treat this like a real interview. We have a set list of questions that we have prepared that we'll go through. The first couple minutes are breaking it down, how the session will work. The next 20 minutes are going through about like 10 to 13, 14 questions, as many questions we get to in 20 minutes. And then the last 7 or 8 minutes are to go through some feedback, just a couple of things, and then we pass along a full-on written evaluation. All right. So we have members go through this all the time, and they say it completely changed how they approached interviews moving forward. And if you want to do this in a private setting with a coach, you don't want to do this on your own or with a family member or a friend, this is your time to take advantage of this offer. Okay. So just to clarify, once you sign up for a premium membership, you can unlock this bonus offer for a $59 mock interview. And then if this session, just to add to the fire here, if this really had you thinking, okay, I get it now, but I need to actually put this into action, then our premium micro training series is exactly where you need to be next. So starting tomorrow, August 14th, we're launching a brand new 2-week exclusive training series designed just for premium members. This isn't a repeat of today. We're actually going deeper, and each session will help you fine-tune your personal brand, practice your interview delivery, and eliminate that second guessing that is holding so many people back. Okay. So we'll show you how to tailor your stories even more precisely. We'll bring in the job matching matrix. We'll walk you through all the buyers in the hiring process and show you how to practice like a pro and really just seal the deal when it comes to interviews. It's going to be a little bit more intensive. All right. And those sessions will be starting this week. Tomorrow will be the first, and then the following week, both at 11 a.m. Eastern. And we do record those sessions and store them in the community. We'll have slides and keep that information accessible. We even, I believe we started these micro trainings back in May. So we have these all in our community that you can access. We try to do like trending topics of the month. So if you're a member that, you join as a premium member tomorrow or, over the weekend, you can access our past events from when we started this as well, and have access to all the events that we do on a weekly basis. All right. So if you're serious about what you learned today, you want to turn those into results, then this is your next best step. So let's keep up that momentum. Awesome. All right. I want to take a couple questions. We have a couple minutes left, so let me take a few of those questions. Okay. So yes, Lewis says, is today's call being recorded? Yes, we are recording today's call. So if you are a member in the community, you can access that in the event calendar. And if you're viewing on LinkedIn or YouTube, you can always go back and rewatch. Okay. Let's see. So when it comes to Kurt's question here, and let me see if I can spotlight this. What's the best way to identify what the employer wants? So this is a great question, Kurt, and this ties back to the job matching matrix, which we briefly walked you through today. But when it comes to this exercise, I should say specifically in this tool, you want to essentially go through the job description and notice the skills that you're seeing repeatedly there. Okay, because that is essentially what the employer is looking for. So if you go through and you're looking in, the regular job description, the requirements, the qualifications, the preferred qualifications, factoring in things like skills that you need, even technologies that you need to be proficient in, you want to jot all those down in the job matching matrix and then speak to, the challenges if those aren't present or if they're done wrong, and then your value and how it matches up to those. Okay. This way you're showing that, you understand the whole process of that skill or that technology, and, you're proficient with it and breaking them through the different examples to support it. And we do have a whole module on this within our course. I believe it's one of our course 1. And we have a whole lesson devoted to the job matching matrix, how it works, and how to identify what employers want. And you have access to all of our courses as premium or standard member, just to clarify that. All right, let's see what other questions we have. Okay, so Roxana says, how do we navigate an interview with interviewers that are very relaxed and not quite asking questions besides tell me about yourself and reiterating the role. So, I mean, if you notice that they're a little bit more relaxed, I would kind of adapt and adhere to their style. So I would maybe match that and keep your responses like a little bit more relaxed and, try to reflect that and match like their tone if you can. But the best thing that you can do is just, follow their lead, answer their questions. I wouldn't try to go, like I said, overboard, try to avoid rambling, try not to tie in like a bunch of examples into one response. Just, keep it to the minimum. We like to say when you're being asked behavioral questions, keep your responses between like 30 to 60 seconds. So you're not under speaking, you're not over speaking, and you are answering, just what they're sharing. If you have time to like tie in maybe like a follow-up question or questions at the end, then you absolutely can ask those. But, I would more so try to match their style as opposed to kind of going above and beyond. And that's something that we also cover in our interview course as well. All right, Diane asks, how long is the August promo available? So we will keep that open for the next week. And that will apply for both the promo code to the premium membership and also the $59 mock interview. All right. So I'm going to take one more question. I know we are a little bit over time, but Steve asks, do you offer any other times for the weekly coaching other than Thursday at 11 a.m.? Unfortunately, no, but we do record those sessions. So that way, if you're someone who can't make the session or you can only attend part of it, you can go back and watch the recording. And we are also considering like a feed for our micro trainings as well. So that way, you can collaborate with other members. And if you do have questions just throughout that time period, our coaches would be happy to get into those and help assist you. But that is something that we are currently discussing as a team. So any feedback is welcome there. All right. Awesome. Well, thank you to everyone for being here today. This has been a wonderful session. And I wanted to leave you all with just a couple words of encouragement before we go. You don't need to be perfect. You need to be intentional here. This is something that I really want you to focus on. Also, a big theme today is that clarity comes from action, not overthinking. So, if you get ghosted, realize it happens to everyone. And today we showed you some of the solutions, and there's some action items that you can start working on today in order to really combat that. And most importantly, the best investment that you can make is in yourself. Like I said, whether it's 20 minutes, 30 minutes, spending some time each day practicing, some form of mock interview, going and thinking about, certain responses that you need to refine, things like that. Or even, following along and keeping the momentum up with our training series. But you all showed up for yourself today, and that is what matters. You're holding yourself accountable. So I want you to be really proud of that. And wherever you go from here, just know that we really do believe in your ability to figure it out, continue to grow through it, and make your next move the best one yet. So thank you to everyone for being here today. Great engagement, great questions, and I hope you have a great rest of your week. Thank you, and bye-bye.